Welcome, everybody. Glad to see you all here. This is our final creator session for the month of May. If you joined us last Friday for Brian Wright's creator session, we announced that we were doing this one today. So I'm really excited to introduce you all to Maggie Carson-Giroux, who is our amazing product designer here at VSCO. And she's going to be showing you some amazing things about the collage tool. Also wanted to point out we're going to do something really fun and interactive towards the end of this call. So while you're listening in to Maggie, get some photos ready on your VSCO camera roll. Take one. I'm going to take one outside. Just get some images ready on your phone that you would like to edit. And I'm going to pass it over to Maggie.
Thank you, Maya. Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie, and I'm just super grateful to have everybody here today for our creator session. I want to start by giving just a little bit of a background about who I am and why I'm here. I was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona, and since I've lived all over the place, but I'm currently raising my family in Montclair, New Jersey. In school, I studied fine art at USC in Los Angeles, and then got my MFA at UW in Seattle in photography. And then I spent about a decade as a photographer in New York and in Los Angeles. And that was followed by a few years running a floral design studio, which I thought was my ultimate dream job. And once I started doing it, I realized that it wasn't, which was pretty awesome to get to do that and realize that I wanted to do something else. So from there, I found my way into a career in product design. I really wanted to build things. That's what I realized I wanted to do, and build things that lasted. And it was through all of those different channels that I found my way here at VSCO. So for the last 5 years, I've led design for the studio, which is where we're always working on improving the ways in which your work is saved and stored and shared. So all of that file management that goes into the studio has been one of my focuses. But what I also do is I lead design on our creative tools and our editors. So that includes everything from the camera and the camera redesign that we did in 2020 to photo and video editing tools like blur and text and borders. But the biggest piece of that has actually been the multimedia editors. So starting with montage and then most recently working on collage, which is why we're all here today, which is great. So right now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we went around building the collage maker, but also most importantly, how you can use it in your own practice and how I use it in mine. So next slide, Maya. Collage has a really long and close relationship to photography. So often with collage, artists will actually use imagery created by other people as a form of appropriation. You'll often see artists combining fragments of found prints and photographs to create their collages. And thinking about how we wanted to enable the creation of digital collage on VSCO, we were really inspired by the idea that creators would be motivated to share their media with one another and collaborate and sort of cross-pollinate across the medium. That seems just a huge potential, especially within the VSCO community, that collage could open up a way for people to work with one another's images. But even more so than that, we saw value in enabling creators to pull from their own archive of images within their studio to create work that would be altogether different and new, and find new value in work they've done in the past, and possibly be inspired to create in new ways. Because we hear often from creators that people talk about the desire to expand their practice. Maybe they're stuck or in a rut, or maybe they can't they're in a position in the pandemic where they can't make new work and they want to find ways to revive their old work. And so we wanted to give people a way to resurface that past work and sort of look at it fresh. So you can think of it almost as appropriating from within your own archive. But if you want to appropriate outside of your archive, I really don't think you should shy away from it. There's a caveat there, appropriation. I could give a whole talk about appropriation, but what I really believe is that you should give yourself permission to play around with anything that inspires you. You shouldn't limit yourself just because it was maybe initially created by somebody else. If you see an image that really grabs you and you want to pull it into the collage editor and play around with it, you should do that. But what you really should do in addition to that is if you want to share it, or especially if you're in a position to make any money from it, really try to reach out to the person who initially created it, ask them for permission, and above all else, make sure that you credit them. In this digital world, I think one of the best things we can do within like a creator environment, creative community, is make sure that we give credit where it's due. So hopefully this is something that like opens you up to like talking to one another more on the platform and sharing your work back and forth. And if that's like too scary and too much for you, you can just do it on your own, or work from your own camera roll, which is what I'm going to be doing today. Everything I'm showing today is stuff that I shot myself. All right, next slide. So when we designed Collage, we really tried to do it with like a very simple interface, with like a finely tuned freeform control at the forefront to give you the power to express yourself exactly how you choose. We really believe that the creative power of collage can be found in the nuance of the position and the crop and the alignment of the images that you're working with. So that's at the very forefront. Like there aren't that many tools, but there's a lot that you can do in like a gestural way to manipulate the different layers in your collage. Next slide. So when you think about collage, much like photography, I think it's as much about what you choose to reveal as it is about what you want to keep concealed, and how especially those like cropped fragments can speak to one another to create something altogether new. Through combining multiple perspectives in a single work, you can have the ability to create something much more complex and much more faceted that goes beyond your individual photographs themselves. So you can use collage to create a conversation between two subjects, or juxtapose disparate things, or draw attention to something that's likeness in form or color or texture across images. These are two very different images, but they have something that resonates between them. And like for me, both of them are very much about these like fleeting moments that are both like delicate and dramatic. This is like a picture of my husband and my son, and then a picture of like a firework that I took a really, really long time ago. And like trying to incorporate these things so that they start to speak to one another in a way that, that they wouldn't otherwise. Next slide. Oh, go back one. Sorry. Okay, great. Something else we set Collage up to do is to allow you to combine multiple versions of the same image. We hear a lot of times that people are editing the same image in a number of different ways and like don't know what to do with all of those extra versions. But I think oftentimes I'll find that like I've edited one image in a way that has like one very unique type of expression, and then I'll edit it in a different way and you'll notice something completely different. But with collage, I can let those expressions like coexist at the same time, rather than having to like post them next to each other, choose only one to go to my VSCO grid. So here's one example of like a super muted black and white version of like a vegetation image that I took in Berkeley recently, overlaid over like a really rich, like saturated, dark, colorful version. And I think like being able to show these two together, it's like two ways of seeing at the same time. And you can sort of like bounce between these like two different ways of looking at things. Next slide. But we also know that collaging in like a free form way can require a ton of creative intent and decision making, like deciding like which images to use and how to position them and how to crop them. So we built a set of templates to create like really compelling starting points for people within the product. And I designed them specifically to have like a very strong visual backbone that would set everyone up to succeed at making something that would be visually pleasing in some way. So the templates themselves are composed of overlaid proportional shapes that all utilize the rule of thirds. So they're all built using this set of building blocks that you see on the screen now. And really they're intended to be starting points. So much like building blocks, for times when things like getting started is just from scratch is too much work, like you can kind of pick one of these and have these movable pieces that you can either leave where they are or like move around a little bit, however you want to arrange them. So if at any time you want to break free from the template, and when you're using one, all you have to do is tap into one of the layers and you can like resize it, you can drag it around, but you'll also be able to see where it was on the grid. So if you ever want to put it back, like you can start to learn sort of like what layouts are appealing to you and pleasing to you by playing around with some of these templates. Next slide. Oh, click once more. There we go. So when designing the set of templates, I actually tested them in a number of ways to make sure that they would be good for like anybody. So what I did was I pulled images from a variety of sources and had them autofill. I was using this like design tool connected to another design tool, connected to another one, so that I was like very much outside of the composition of these, and really wanted them to be auto-generated. But what I wanted to see is what they would look like if they were filled without any creative intent at all. So I was pulling from, these were from my VSCO collection at the time. So they were all done by other creators on VSCO, and they were things that I just sort of like tagged or pulled out of the ether because I thought they were interesting for some reason or another. And what was super interesting to me in doing this exercise was that, like, yes, these layouts are compelling, but really what was even more interesting was like how random the selection was, like what these little moments were that were happening in each of them without any repositioning or any recropping. And that really made me feel like this was something that would be a really great starting point for people who are really new to collage. Next slide. Maya, can you advance us to the next one? Thanks. So as part of this test, I also started filling these templates at random with images from my own profile. So things I had posted over time. And seeing my own images combined in this way really like unlocked something in me that led to how I think about and approach collage in my own work. And for me, it was really about loosening that intent. Like I'm very precise about the things that I choose to work with. I'm very controlled, got that like designer's mentality, like extreme intent. But in doing this at random, I was seeing these things like thrown together in this way where I was like, wow, I never would have put this picture of my couch over this picture of a firework, over this picture of like a curtain that I'd taken in my house. But there was something about the way that it was put together that was like, whoa, I need to like loosen up a little bit and just start to play with this and see what I can do. So that's really what I started doing. And this was really early. This is actually when we were designing Montage, like a couple of years ago. So it's been like sort of stewing in my mind ever since, as we've been thinking about like creating a different version of Montage specifically for collage. Next slide. So gonna roll a little bit further back to get like a little bit more personal now, to talk a bit more about my own practice. I touched a little bit on my background at the beginning, but I want to give a little more context here. So from the time I ended art school all through my 20s, I worked as a photographer, and I also maintained an like a fine art practice before I changed course in my early 30s to work as a product designer. So in the years after like stopping working, I've largely abandoned my art practice as my focus shifted to be more around design and like building photography tools for other people rather than doing my own work. And during that time, I also became a mom, and my focus shifted even further from my art towards my family. So as a photographer, then and now, I've always been compelled by an impulse to capture these like fleeting moments of beauty. That's like really what drives my impulse to capture things, is when I see something happening that I know isn't going to be happening for long, like have to capture it. And looking back, it was almost always an observation of how light was passing through the space that I was in. Like I was very aware of just like the fact that the light was constantly changing, but if it was doing something unique, like I had to find a way to like capture it and convey that to the rest of the world. So these two images reflect the type of images that I was creating like early on in my practice, like up to now. But if you go to the next slide, this is a zoomed out view of my VSCO feed. So if you look at my work like over the last decade, you can see like a pretty abrupt shift in my subject matter about like a third of the way up. Like it's just all kids all the time. And I realized that like as a mom, not only am I like never alone or in these like quiet moments of like contemplation, but I also, my observation of these fleeting moments of beauty are now much more centered on my kids and on them growing up and then passing through the world in these ways that like I can't control. And so I went from having this like very sort of like minimalist, like artsy aesthetic and identity that was tied to that as a designer, to like really having to shift myself to be able to include this new persona in my own sense of identity as a creative, that like these could be pictures of my children and still be like valid and still be beautiful and still be interesting. And like I'm still like struggling with that. But I'm pushing myself to share these things that are more personal. because I haven't quite figured out how to make sense of it. And through collage, it's actually been one of the ways in which I've been able to tie these things together. So next slide, Maya. Here's two different pictures taken at two very different times. I keep bringing this firework image back, but it's very much like the way that I was trying to make work for so long. So like, it's like a very indicative image of like the type of photography I wanted to be doing. But I realized like I'm shooting very different things now, but I'm still shooting them in the same way. So one of the things I'm trying to do in my collage work is weave together these moments from within these two like disparate lived realities. And part of that is to understand my impulses for capturing these things in the first place, like really trying to tap into like why I'm trying to capture these things and why it's important to me. But also to intentionally bring those common impulses together in conversations so that I can make more sense of them. And I titled this session Layering Perspectives because literally we're going to be talking about like layering two images in a collage. But also I'm thinking a lot about my practice of layering my own perspectives of beauty through time and as a way to help myself string together both the past and the present so that I can better understand how the person I've been still exists within the person that I am. So it's as much about this sort of like external showing of what is interesting to me to understanding in an internal way, like what it is that's driving me to keep making things. Next slide. This is one example of a collage that I made that does this. And a little background on these images. The top image is one that I took on my way to work on the morning that I found out I was expecting my first child. So it was like this moment in time where like everything felt like it was shifting and in motion. And it's overlaid over an image of our unmade bed a couple weeks after he was born. And what I wanted to do when looking at these was I was thinking about the fabrics a lot and how one they're like really folded in stillness, and then the other one they're really folded in motion. But what I did in a technical way was I lined them up so that the shadow of one fold connected to another. So they're just lined up in this like one spot. And it's also this like little point of contrast. But I was trying to like basically string together these two moments in time in like a visual, physical way, so that I can also start to make sense of all the things that happen between the two of them. So next slide. This is one more. And these are two that I actually took more recently after I had my daughter, my second child. But I took both of these around the same time, and I was like very blinded by exhaustion when she was born last year. So really like the only things that I remember from this time were the things that I took pictures of. Like I have no memories outside of them. So I'm glad I was taking a lot of pictures. But in layering these, I was really thinking about like, I don't know, I mean, I guess the first piece is that the crop of the first one, I was really thinking about like the simultaneous like expansion of identity and loss of identity. Like I'm holding this person who like has the exact same ear that I have, but like I'm feeling a complete loss of like who I was at the same time, this like blending of two people. But also in layering them, like this other picture is a picture of like our bed with like all of our pillows stacked up on it because like just so much laundry to do all the time. Thinking about like the balance of like comfort and discomfort that comes with mothering an infant. Like there's so much of both. Like it's so much about creating comfort for them. And there's also so much discomfort and exhaustion that's also tied into that. And so finding ways to think about the state that I was in when I was making these images and also how they can like speak to each other to tell more like complete and faceted story about what it really is to be a mom. Like it's not a one-sided thing, you know, it's like it's both, it's all of it, and it's not bad, it's not good, it's not hard or easy, it's everything. And so this has allowed me to like make a little bit more sense of all of these various things. If you tap this collage icon in the top menu, so you'll see there's like a little square with the square inside of it at the very top. That's what I'm going to tap right now. And that brings you to a template picker. So you can pick any of these templates to work from. I'm just going to choose one, which is one of my favorites. I love this one. And what this does is basically sets up 3 areas for you to add something into. So one of the things I also really like to do with this when I'm first using a template is just add the same image to all of them. So to just kind of get a sense of like how the scale changes too when you bring something in. It's not the same size image, so it keeps cropping it down. So you can end up with like a really nice echo of like the same image through the template if you want to. The other thing you can do, which is a really fun way to work, is to just like pick random stuff. So you can tap something and just tap replace in the bottom menu and pull something else. So I'm going to pull this for the background and then pick something else for the foreground. Let's see, let's do something like this one. And so that you can start to really see like how things can play with one another and against one another. The other thing you can do with these templates, like I mentioned before, is if you want to move something around, if you want to change something, all you have to do is select it and you can drag it around. You can pull from the corners to resize things. You can pinch and zoom to like twist things around on the screen. But you can really like break these however you want. If you want to keep replacing things, you can just tap replace and pull something else into that same place, and it won't move. It'll just stay exactly where it is. So you can just drop something in that you want to be working with. And if you decide that like, hey, I actually really just want two things, I don't want this third thing floating around, you can easily delete it by just selecting it and scrolling to the end of the toolbar, and then you can tap delete. And then you can end up with just like whatever it is that you want to be working with. If you ever want to add something back in, you just have to tap media at the bottom and you'll see your option to add something back in. So I'll choose something else and it'll drop it right in the middle, and then you can, resize it and change it however you want.
But thank you so much, Maggie. This was truly amazing. We've really enjoyed this. Please, if you all could let Maggie know how you enjoy this in the chat, that'd be amazing. Would love to do this again, maybe.
Oh, this is
yeah.
my pleasure. It feels so good to be here, like talking to everybody about like what we're building and why we're building it, and also like how I'm using it and how everyone else is using it. Like it's so, especially in this environment, it's so hard to get a sense of like the people that I'm designing things for. It's like you're so far away. There's so many of you. But it's like this gives me just that one chance to like have a little bit of FaceTime with you all. So thank you for coming and thank you for being here.